So this poem that we're going to look at today is The Unknown Citizen, again by Auden. If we start at the top again, looking at the title first to make some assessment of what the title is referring to, we see that if we start off with the irony in the title, that it feels like it's the start of a poem about war, where we, in a lot of nations have the unknown soldier, and we bury one man to represent every man that is lost in war, that potentially we don't have the records to bury them accurately. So we bury this one person to represent them all, and it's quite a respectful and quite a sort of a nice memorial to the life of these soldiers. When we see this though, this sort of term, the unknown citizen, there's an irony in that, because a citizen isn't lost in war and wouldn't be unknown. Should have family and loved ones that could be able to speak to who they are. But I think Auden's trying to say that what is happening here is that the citizen is lost, the individual is lost, and as a result, they're just like the unknown soldier who's gone missing in war and can't be buried accurately and with the proper honour, that the citizen is lost their sense of self and their identity as well, and that they need to be buried and remembered in a very generic manner, just as those soldiers who were lost to us. Just an overall thing, the poem essentially is a parody, and you'll see over in this top corner here where I say that the form is an imitation of a style of poetry that is quite simplistic. It's not Auden's general tendency to have a lot of rhyme in his poems, but he uses a lot of rhyme in this particular one to make fun and create this satire around this monument that is being built to this unknown citizen. So when we get to this part, to JS 07M378, this marble monument is erected by the state. We see that rhyming sort of rhythmic pattern that is created, and it's quite humorous because this man is a citizen, but he's referred to as a number, and his individuality is really taken away. And the fact that the marble monument is being erected is because the state actually really respects this citizen, who by the end of the poem we'll find tends to do exactly what they're supposed to do, which is essentially what the state wants of them. So the voice of the poem then, when we start, becomes the voice of a bureaucrat who is faceless, just like the unknown citizen. We're not really introduced to the voice, but the voice is obviously from that state perspective. So we start with he was found by the Bureau of Statistics, and we've got an immediate impersonal tone. We're talking statistics. His name is a number, and to be honest, like the question mark here by Auden is, why have a government agency look into a citizen's life at all? There's a humour in that, a dark humour, but a humour all the same. Then it goes on to be one against, and we've got the idea of the irony, because this one unknown citizen is actually supposed to represent many, but we're talking about this individual citizen who could be anybody, but essentially is the person that we're going to describe. Against who there was no official complaint, and again we get this question, like, who would make an official complaint against just a normal citizen? And that sort of asinine or silly nature of this poem is revealed through some of the commentaries that Auden makes, because it would be fairly unusual for a citizen to have an official complaint made against them. And then we go to, like, all the reports on his conduct agree that he was a saint. And we've got this hyperbole of all the reports, again sort of this silly sort of sense that there would be multiple reports on this unknown citizen. That doesn't seem to be that important, but the poem's sort of suggesting that there would be all this documentation around their life. Then we've got the idea of, in the modern sense of an old-fashioned word, and it's sort of a bit of a contradiction, that you would have a modern sense of an old-fashioned, but the contradiction shows a shift in thinking, that loyalty to the state makes you a saint, not caring for your fellow man, or not producing miracles to sort of heal and save others. That the saint, the modern sense of a saint, is someone who just does what they're told, which is a sad indictment on us as citizens of the world. When we look at saint, the man is referred to there as being a saint, but again, there's no religious sort of element to that. It's about loyalty. And then for everything he did, he served the greater community, and we start to see this thing that Auden's going to do consistently, and I'll try to highlight most of them. That things that he again in a parody sort of manner. He doesn't believe that these things are more important, but he capitalizes them to show that these are the things that are valued by the state and unfortunately valued by us as citizens as well. So the greater community is capitalized to show its importance, that the community and what the greater good, the greater need of what the state requires is more important than anything. And then he compares it directly to the war, except for that. And my comment there with the war being capitalized as well is that it exceeds even just doing what you're asked to do in your community by going and fighting the state's wars. You exceed even just being compliant. It's a greater sacrifice for what the state needs. And then it's got the idea till the day he retired. He worked in a factory and never got fired. And you see these rhyming couplets that are used throughout, and I didn't sort of point them out at every point. When you sort of see these sort of rhyming couplets, they create a silly sort of atmosphere, of this rhythmic rhyming sort of idea. But they're repetitive too. They create a monotone sort of sort of tone that tries to exaggerate how boring the life of this man is. And even the fact that he never got fired doesn't say he did a great job. It just says he didn't do a bad enough job to be asked to leave. And then we see the next word, but satisfied his employers. And again, satisfied is not overly complimentary, but it's not negative either. It's sort of quite mundane, pedestrian, sort of language that describes this man's life. He worked for Fudge Motors Incorporated, which is a fabricated company, but it does sound a lot like Ford. And that sort of idea of the mechanical sort of nature of building and the sort of process driven sort of factories that people worked in. Not a lot of creativity, not a lot of skill necessarily, just a part of the machine, a part of the process, and that's what this citizen essentially is. Then it says, yet he wasn't a scab, or odd in his views. So a scab essentially is a union sort of reference. A scab would be someone who took the jobs of others during strike action, or someone who, when the union decided to strike, would continue to work. So a scab is not a positive, sort of sense in this time period that Auden's writing this poem. And to say that he wasn't a scab elevates him. But again, it's the negative, not the positive. He wasn't one. It's not like he was a great union leader. It's that he wasn't one of the bad things that the state doesn't want him to be. He was part of the union, paid his fees, which makes him a good, honest man. And the big thing is that union was sound. And again, the judgment of the bureaucrat here, of the voice, is that it's tempered. It's not exaggerating how good the union was. It was just sound, just average, just okay. But the unions could be worse than that, because some of the unions were heavily linked to communism. So that he's making the point that this union wasn't like that they were quite sound. And then we go on to our social psychology workers. And again, this is, to me, capitalized because it's a fabricated sort of department, but we're probably living in a world where that really exists now, but probably wouldn't have existed in Auden's time. And again, some of these things are highlighted in capital like the press, because it's like, how on earth would this department or this aspect of the state or the government have such an influence on our lives? But it does, and that's where the humour stops, and the comment or the commentary by Auden comes in. He was popular. He liked to drink, which is fairly normal male behaviour. But you notice here that Auden uses the singular term, liked a drink, and doesn't sort of give you the idea that he was a drunk or that he was an alcoholic. that he liked a drink with his mates, which is quite normal, human and male behaviour. We get back now to the press, which again is capitalised, again a controlling aspect of the state. If they control the media, they can control the narrative, they can control the language that is being placed around certain elements of the world. In World War II, World War One, lots of governments took greater control over their press to ensure that the people weren't afraid or weren't scared, so they didn't report things necessarily accurately, to make sure that the morale of the home front was still there. So we get the idea that Auden's probably aware of this in wartime, that the press are sort of putting out a version of the truth, and let's be honest, the media still has that sort of reputation today for not necessarily telling the whole truth, but the truth that sells papers and makes people engage with the media. The fact that he bought the paper every day again is a hyperbole. There's no possible way that the government or the state would know if he did that, but it shows he is doing the right thing, buying his paper, reading the news, getting his opinions from there, and in some ways being brainwashed by those. He reacts to his advertisements in a normal way, again suggesting that media control is fairly normal, that you should read the paper and take on what they ask you to take on. Then we've got policies taken out in his name prove that he was fully insured. He has a health card, so he's doing the things that the state expect him to do. So he's got his insurance so that he can get medical care when he needs it, but he only ever used it once. And when he left the hospital, like a good little boy, he was cured. Okay, so again, there's a real judgment there that that's what you're supposed to do. But obviously, if you go to hospital, you're sick, and you don't always get cured. But the state expects you to not be so sick that you're going to cost them money. So he took little risks in his life, and he wasn't a burden to the state. And you can see from the state's point of view that this is the ideal. This is what they're looking for. We then go into some more sort of state, government-run sort of organisations, producers research, high grade living, installment plan, modern man, public opinion. All right, so all of these things are capitalised to show that these aspects are important in the world, and that we should sort of revere them. But when we look at them, particularly like the producers research, it starts to come more around consumerism. High grade living is that standard of living that essentially we're looking for, and particularly in developed countries like America, we want this sort of this standard of living that is beyond what we see in other countries. And the way that we get this is the installment plan, okay, which is given a capitalized idea, but it's to Auden a crazy idea that you would get something that you haven't paid for, and then you pay it off even though you didn't have the money at the time. So this is something we're quite familiar with credit, and we don't really think twice about it. But to Auden, it's a control mechanism, because to be a modern man and to be able to sort of exist in this world and be regarded as sort of keeping up with everyone else, you need to have stuff, and that consumerism to Auden is totally foreign. He doesn't understand why people would get engaged in this world where they become reliant on having things, even though they don't have the money for them, just so that they can fit in. And we see the accumulation of the things that you have: a phonograph, a radio, a car, and a Frigidaire, which is basically a fridge. These are things that maybe weren't always required for people to live a normal life, but now you can't exist without them. And the question Auden is sort of raising is why? Where did this come from? And it comes from the fact that the state is saying that is what you need to have. And again, it's a control mechanism, because if you're going to buy these things, you need to continue to work, you need to earn an income and pay them off. And in doing that, you're going to be working for the state, and the state then has control of you. So to Auden, he's quite he's quite cynical about the way that this has been set up, and what the way that it's working, because he feels like the state wants the ideas that they want to be perpetuated into the citizens. Then it goes on to talk about how he held proper opinions. And again, the proper opinions are those that are propagated or pushed out by the state. So these are the ones that are ideal. Your own individual ideas or your own individual sort of sense of the world is not important. The proper opinions are the ones that are preset for you by the state or by the government. And some of these are like, for the time of the year, so it adapts and adjusts to whatever the government needs. And here he actually makes a point of when there was peace, he was for peace, and when there was war, he went. Now, we expect the end of that line, just for the balance, to be, when there was war, he was for war. But to me, that it's more brutal than that. He isn't even for war. He just blindly goes to war, and the consequences of what that could mean to his life and to his family are totally disregarded because that's what the state expects, and he does it without any questions. He just blindly follows, what he's told to do. Again, as a good citizen, he was married. He added 5 children. Added's an interesting word. Didn't have 5 children or like produce. Added is like almost automated or robotic. He built these children, so it takes away some of that romantic essence of like having a family because he did it for the state. Added 5 children to the population who could potentially, I guess, go and fight in wars in the future. And also, he could, be 5 more people who are just like their father and do what they're supposed to do and continue to perpetuate the power of the state. So, to the eugenist, which is a person responsible, for the qualities of the children and the offspring that come through, he's quite happy because that's the amount of people that if everyone produced, the population continues to flourish, the economy continues to flourish, and the state continues to flourish. Then again, this hyperbole never interfered with his kids' education, never sort of commented to his teachers or asked questions. And again, that's because he trusted the state. There's no need for him to get involved. So Auden's making a really serious commentary here, saying that this blindness and this lack of critical thinking is what's giving the state their power, and that we're personally, we're a part of that problem. Okay, and I'll go into that more at the end of the poem here. Then we get to these rhetorical questions, which is a real shift because everything's been quite comical and quite satirical up until this point. But when we get to here, excuse me, Auden makes the point of his poem. He makes his real commentary. So was this unknown citizen, was he free? Was he happy? And the question is like really well placed because the answer to us is clearly no. He wasn't neither of these things. None of the language that is used is it's not high or positive. It's quite mediocre. It's average. It doesn't sound like a life where you'd be free and happy. And then the response from the bureaucrat, the voice that is telling us the poem, is that the question is absurd. And again, this hyperbolic sort of statement suggests that um, there's no there's no way that the state could know that, but the state is so opinionated about how much they know and how much they understand about the citizens in their own country that they deem that question absurd, even though there's no possible way that they could actually know whether their citizens are free and happy. Also interesting that there's 2 questions, but Auden then writes it in the singular. So he says it's the question, sensing that the bureaucrats see freedom and happiness as the same thing, where we may be able to look at them quite separately and look at happiness and freedom as 2 different things, but to the government or to the state, it's just one question. Then the last line about this, a commentary about this sort of citizen from the bureaucrats is, had anything been wrong, we should certainly have heard. When it says been wrong, to me, it's the sense again that the state is more concerned with what isn't going wrong than what is going right. They're not looking at the optimal sort of idea of the life of this citizen, of what could possibly be in terms of how good their life can be. They're just making sure that their life isn't interfering or getting in the way of what the state wants to achieve. And then the sort of end bit where we should certainly have heard indicates that to me the lowest sort of modality in terms of the poem and in terms of the voice. There's a level of uncertainty. He deems that he should have heard, but he's not as sure that because he's got all the government, sort of details and documents that he needs to be able to make an assertion on this person's life, and he's thinking, well, based on what I've got, we should know, but I don't have a document that sort of writes about that. So I've got a document about his union, I've got a document about what he bought, I've got a document that says he went to war, but I don't have documents on his happiness and freedom. And to me, the lower modality starts to suggest that there are certain things that the government can't control, no matter how much they would like to. They can't control the freedom and the happiness of their people. So when we get to the end of the poem, I guess what's Auden's commentary overall in writing this poem? And to me, it's really satirizing the government and how much they want to control us and how much they want to control their citizens. And there's a judgment there. He's being very critical of the government of how they dehumanize and devalue the individual. And the way that he's written his poem suggests that he's written it in a comical manner, very generic commentary, use some rhyme to sort of make fun of the fact that they don't really know, but they feel like, as the government, they can make a judgment on your life based on the way that they wanted your life to be. And there's a sadness in that, that the government would want that, that they would want that sort of control over their people, and that their people would lose their individuality. So it's an interesting, a really interesting poem from that point of view in terms of that critique of the state and of the government, because it's balanced to me with the critique and the disappointment with the citizen, that we are like this unknown citizen, where we do get caught up in what subconsciously we're not even aware that we're being led there, but we're happy to sort of follow what the state or what the government indicates to us. And by the time the poem's finished and our life is over, we haven't been critical thinkers, and we've been so compliant that we've lost ourselves. We've lost our individuality and our sense of self. So to me, there's quite a warning here, a didactic sense to his poem, to say, if that is you, if you are this unknown citizen, you need to take more care in what you're going to do with your opinion and with your voice. Don't let it be that you are just a generic, sort of number, an existence within our world. Make sure that you're far more than that. So a really interesting poem by Auden, simple compared to maybe some of his others, but simple on purpose, with real intention for him to represent his ideas in a really unique and different manner.